The moment I saw her lie in the dark, her nightgown on backward and our wedding portrait shattered across the floor, something cold moved through my chest before I even understood what I was looking at. My name is Grantham. Until that night, I believed nothing on earth could shake my trust in my wife. I was wrong. Work had pulled me away for 3 days, a supply chain conference 2 states over, back-to-back meetings, hotel coffee that tasted like cardboard, and a hunger to get home that grew heavier with every hour. When the final session wrapped early, I didn't hesitate. I canceled my Friday flight and booked the next one out that same afternoon. I wanted to surprise Seraphine a full day before she expected me. The whole flight, I thought about her. Her growing belly, 7 months now, round enough that she started resting her coffee mug on top of it and laughing every time. The way she pressed her palm against her stomach at night, whispering things to our daughter that she thought I couldn't hear through the bathroom door. The tired smile she gave me every morning, even on the days exhaustion pulled at her eyes before 9 a.m. Coming home a day early felt like the best gift I could give her. I pictured her face when she opened the door and found me standing there instead of hearing my key turn on Friday like she expected. Instead, I walked into a nightmare I never could have imagined. The apartment building was quiet when the rideshare dropped me off, porch lights glowing along the row of townhouses. Nothing out of place. I climbed the front steps 2 at a time, grinning like an idiot, rehearsing what I'd say when she opened the door. She never answered my key turning in the lock. Our apartment sat almost entirely dark. Only a thin line of light spilled from beneath our bedroom door at the end of the hallway. I set my suitcase down quietly beside the coat rack, still smiling, still imagining her face when she saw me standing in the doorway. The hallway had never felt so long. I noticed the picture frames along the wall were straight, undisturbed, exactly where they always hung. The kitchen light was off. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment besides my own footsteps. Everything ordinary until it wasn't. Then I reached our bedroom door, pushed it open, and the smile died on my lips. Seraphine sat curled on the edge of the bed, her back to me, unmoving, her shoulders drawn in tight like she was trying to make herself smaller. Her silk nightgown, the pale blue one I'd given her for our anniversary, was inside out, backward. The seams showed plainly against the fabric, stitched lines running down her spine like something turned wrong side out on purpose, in a hurry, without thinking. I told myself it meant nothing. Pregnancy made even small, ordinary tasks difficult by the 3rd trimester. Maybe she dressed for bed exhausted, half asleep, not paying attention to which way the fabric faced. Then I saw the rest of the room, and the excuse in my head collapsed. Our wedding portrait, the one in the silver frame Seraphine had picked out herself, the one that sat on our dresser through 2 apartments and 1 house move, lay shattered on the floor. The glass had cracked in a spiderweb pattern across our faces, both of us laughing at something the photographer said, frozen mid-joy, now split into fragments. Shards covered the white area rug in uneven pieces, catching the lamplight and throwing small broken reflections across the ceiling. Beside the frame, a dark red stain had soaked into the fibers of the rug, spreading out from an overturned wine glass lying on its side a few feet away, its stem unbroken, its bowl empty. For 1 terrible second, my mind painted the worst picture it could invent, and I let it. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak, my heart hammering against my ribs loud enough that I was sure she could hear it even with her back turned. My mother's voice rose up from somewhere in the back of my memory, unwelcome and sharp. She used to tell me, standing in her kitchen years ago, long before Seraphine ever existed in my life, never ignore what your gut is telling you, Grantham, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. I hated that advice most of my adult life, brushed it off as old-fashioned superstition dressed up as wisdom. That night, standing in my own bedroom doorway, it wrapped around my throat and refused to let go. Had someone been here? Had there been an argument? A struggle? Someone who left just before I walked in, slipping out to the back stairwell while I rode the elevator up? Had Seraphine broken our photograph in anger, or in grief, or in guilt she couldn't carry alone anymore? I hated myself for even forming the thought. I loved her. She was carrying our child. 7 months into a pregnancy, we fought 2 years of appointments and 1 devastating miscarriage to finally reach. And still, in the space of a single breath, doubt took root in my chest and grew faster than I had any power to stop it. The backward nightgown. The broken glass scattered like confetti from a party no one invited me to. The wine soaked into white fabric, dark and spreading, looking for one irrational second, like something far worse than spilled Merlot. Each detail stacked on top of the last, building a story in my head that I never once gave it a chance to deny, correct, or explain. I became judge, jury, and in the silence of that doorway, I had already started drafting a sentence. Then came the thought that nearly broke something in me permanently. What if the last 3 days hadn't been as innocent on her end as I'd assumed on mine? What if someone else had been standing exactly where I now stood, only an hour, maybe less, before I arrived? I thought about the co-worker from her office building who always lingered too long in conversation at company dinners. I thought about nothing at all, really, just fear wearing the mask of memory, inventing evidence out of thin air, because my chest needed somewhere to put the panic. For nearly a full minute, I stood in that doorway convicting my pregnant wife of something I couldn't even name, based on nothing but fabric and glass, and the ugly things of frightened mind manufacturers in the dark. Then Seraphine moved, and every accusation in my head evaporated at once. Her shoulders jerked violently. She curled forward, both hands gripping her stomach, and a sound left her that I will never forget as long as I live, somewhere between a gasp and a cry, raw and involuntary. "Seraphine," I whispered, finally finding my voice, crossing the last few feet of carpet between us. She turned her head slowly, and what I saw wiped every suspicious thought from my mind in an instant. Her skin had gone pale, almost gray under the lamplight. Sweat beaded along her hairline and darkened the collar of her nightgown. Her eyes met mine, wide and glassy, and there was no guilt in them anywhere, only pain, raw and immediate, the kind that erases every other thought a person could possibly be having. She parted her lips to speak, struggling, and the words that finally came out shattered every ugly thing I'd built in my mind over the last 60 seconds. "The baby," she breathed, barely audible. "Something's wrong with the baby, Grantham." I crossed the remaining distance in 2 steps and caught her before she folded sideways onto the mattress. Up close, I saw what the dim lamplight had hidden from the doorway. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her lips had taken on a faint bluish tinge at the edges. She was struggling to breathe evenly, each inhale shorter and more labored than the last, her chest rising in shallow, frightened bursts. "I called Thessaly," she managed between breaths. "Before you got home. I couldn't reach you. My phone died, and I didn't know your flight number to call the airline. I didn't ask about the nightgown. I didn't ask about the photograph or the wine glass lying broken on its side. None of it mattered anymore. None of it had ever mattered as much as the fear now written across my wife's face. I lifted her into my arms as gently and quickly as I could manage, grabbed my keys from the entryway table, and carried her out to the car, breaking every speed limit between our apartment and the hospital 11 minutes away. The next 40 minutes blurred into fluorescent lights, a wheelchair someone pushed toward us the second we came through the emergency doors, a nurse asking questions I could barely answer coherently because my hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to fill out the intake forms. They wheeled Seraphine back before I could even find a seat in the waiting room. I paced the length of that room alone for what felt like hours, replaying the 60 seconds I'd spent silently accusing her betrayal while she'd been sitting there alone, frightened, fighting to protect our daughter, without me anywhere near her. A doctor finally emerged and told me Seraphine's blood pressure had spiked to a dangerous level, a complication called preeclampsia that could turn serious quickly in the 3rd trimester. They'd caught it in time. Both she and the baby would be fine with monitoring, but she needed to stay overnight for observation, and any additional stress right now could push her blood pressure back into a danger zone. Stress like the kind I'd nearly caused her myself. Standing in that doorway with suspicion written across my face before I'd said a single kind word to my own wife. The first night in that hospital room, I barely slept at all. I sat in the stiff visitor's chair beside her bed, watching the monitor track her heartbeat and the baby's in 2 separate steady rhythms, and I made myself a quiet promise. Whatever had happened in that bedroom, whatever explanation waited for me once she was strong enough to give it, I would listen first and judge never again. I had already failed that promise once, silently, in the space of 60 seconds, and I intended never to fail it a second time. By morning, a specialist came by to explain the specifics of preeclampsia in more detail, how quickly it could escalate if left unmonitored, how fortunate we were that her body had signaled distress before anything more serious developed. I asked question after question, needing to understand every possible warning sign for the weeks still ahead of us. Seraphine watched me from the bed, exhausted but present, and reached for my hand once the doctor left the room. "You didn't ask me anything last night," she said quietly. "About the room." I told her the truth. Nothing in that room had mattered once I saw her face. Whatever had happened, whatever story the glass and the fabric seemed to tell, none of it outweighed the fact that she needed me. And for one unforgivable minute standing in that doorway, I had almost chosen suspicion over her instead. It took 2 more days before Seraphine felt strong enough to sit up and explain everything from the beginning, and when she finally did, the truth turned my stomach in an entirely different direction than the one my fear had originally pointed toward. 3 days earlier, the same afternoon I'd left for my conference, Seraphine had received an anonymous email. No name attached, just a freshly created account, forwarding a string of messages that looked, at a glance, exactly like flirtatious text sent from my phone number to an unknown woman's number. The timestamps lined up suspiciously close to the exact days I was supposed to be sitting in conference sessions 2 states away. She hadn't shown them to me, hadn't even called to ask. She'd sat alone with them for hours instead, turning the possibility over and over in her mind, telling herself repeatedly that it had to be fabricated, unable to fully silence the small, persistent fear anyway. Eventually, she called Thessaly, her closest friend since their college dorm days, and asked her to come over that night to look at everything together, because 2 exhausted, frightened minds sometimes think more clearly than when alone in the dark. Thessaly arrived within the hour, still in her work clothes, and the 2 of them spent nearly 2 hours combing through the screenshots line by line, comparing every timestamp against my actual flight confirmation and hotel check-in emails, which Seraphine had access to through our shared travel calendar. Slowly, methodically, they found the cracks in the story someone had built. One message supposedly sent from a city I hadn't even landed in yet, according to my flight tracker. A contact name saved in the screenshots that didn't match any number I had ever owned in the 11 years Seraphine had known me. Whoever built this fake conversation had clearly been careful, patient even, but not quite careful enough to survive 2 determined women with shared laptop and a working internet connection. While they worked late into the evening, Seraphine, exhausted, 7 months pregnant, and steadily more anxious with every passing minute, had gone to change a bed and pulled her nightgown on backward without noticing, her mind entirely consumed by the sick possibility that her marriage might be built on a lie she hadn't seen coming. Thessaly, trying to calm her down, had poured them each a small glass of wine, setting both glasses on the dresser near our wedding portrait, while they continued scrolling through screenshots on the bed. At some point past 11, standing up too quickly to stretch her aching lower back, Seraphine's vision had blurred sharply, an early warning sign of the blood pressure spike already building silently inside her body, invisible to both of them in the moment. She stumbled sideways, caught the edge of the dresser to steady herself, and knocked both wine glasses and the framed photograph to the floor in the same motion. Thessaly rushed to help her sit down on the bed, checked her pulse with shaking hands, and asked twice if she wanted to go to the hospital immediately. Seraphine, still convinced it was nothing more than dizziness from standing too fast, insisted she just needed to lie down and rest. Thessaly stayed another 20 minutes to make sure the dizziness had passed, then left reluctantly, promising to come back first thing in the morning to check on her, unaware that the real danger had only just begun quietly building beneath the surface. There had been no affair waiting for me behind that bedroom door. No stranger slipping out moments before I arrived. Only a frightened pregnant woman, a loyal friend try her best to help, a glass of wine spilled during a moment of sudden dizziness, and a fabricated set of messages engineered by someone with a very specific, very calculated purpose in mind. The real question that mattered now was who had sent them and why. Thessaly, it turned out, had already started digging on her own before Seraphine was even discharged from the hospital, refusing to let the question rest. She was sharper than most people gave her credit for at first glance, and something about the anonymous account had bothered her from the very first read-through. The account had been created only 2 days before the messages were sent, built specifically for the single purpose and nothing else. Whoever did it clearly wanted Seraphine doubting me at the exact moment I was 3 states away and completely unreachable, unable to defend myself or clear anything up in real time. It took Thessaly less than a week, working through recovery email addresses and old account records of the patients that surprised even Seraphine, to trace the anonymous account back through a recovery email that had been reused sloppily on an old, long-abandoned shopping account from years earlier. The name attached to that recovery account stopped my heart colder than the wine stain on our rug ever had. Rosalind, my stepmother. I hadn't spoken to Rosalind in nearly 6 months, not since a tense family dinner where she made it painfully clear she believed our family estate, the one my late father had spent 30 years building before he passed, should skip my inheritance entirely once a grandchild arrived, since in her exact words, spoken across a dinner table like it was obvious, new bloodlines complicate old promises. I dismissed the comment at the time as bitterness dressed up as opinion. An old woman testing boundaries she knew she'd already lost. I never once imagined she would actually act on it. But a grandchild changed the terms of my father's trust in a way Rosalind understood better than I did at the time. Once our daughter was born, a clause embedded deep in the original paperwork would activate, shifting a significant portion of the estate directly into a protected account for her, held securely until she reached adulthood, entirely outside Rosalind's reach or influence. If my marriage had collapsed before the birth, if Seraphine had left me in the chaos and heartbreak of a fabricated affair, the resulting legal complications could have delayed or possibly voided that clause entirely, buying Rosalind years of uncontested access to funds meant for a grandchild she had never once wanted to acknowledge as family. She hadn't set out to physically hurt anyone. She had simply pulled a single thread and hoped, quietly, from a comfortable distance, that an entire marriage would unravel on its own without her fingerprints anywhere near the wreckage. She very nearly succeeded, not through the fake messages themselves, which fell apart under scrutiny, but through everything those messages set into motion. The sleepless night, the spiked stress hormones, the dangerous rise in blood pressure that nearly cost us our daughter before she'd even taken her first breath. I confronted Rosalind 3 weeks later. One Seraphine had been cleared to travel again, and our daughter's due date crept steadily closer on the calendar. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I sat across from her at her own dining room table, the same table where she'd made her original comment months earlier, and placed a printed copy of the entire email trail in front of her, alongside the account recovery records Thessaly had painstakingly gathered. Rosalind's expression didn't crumble the way some small part of me had hoped it would. She simply looked down at the papers for a long moment, then back up at me, and asked, almost casually, what exactly I intended to do about it. I told her the truth, plainly and without theatrics. My father's estate attorney already held copies of everything. The trust's independent trustee, a longtime family friend with no financial stake in either side of the family, had already been formally notified that someone had attempted to interfere with the succession clause through deliberate, fraudulent means, under the specific terms my father had written into the original trust document himself. Years before any of this began, any beneficiary caught attempting to manipulate the outcome through deception would immediately forfeit their own remaining share of the estate entirely. Rosalind had spent months quietly trying to protect money she believed she was entitled to. Instead, she lost every remaining dollar my father had left her, all of it transferred by the trustee's ruling directly into a protected account held for our daughter, the very grandchild she had tried so hard to push out of the family picture before she was even born. She never apologized, not once, not even after the trustee's decision became final. I never expected her to. Some people only ever recognize consequences, never the wrongdoing that led to them, and I stopped needing her remorse the moment I watched Seraphine hold our daughter for the first time in that hospital room, safe, healthy, and finally free of the quiet poison someone else had tried so carefully to pour into our marriage from a distance. Rosalind wasn't invited to the hospital when our daughter was born. She wasn't invited to the small gathering we held at home once we brought her back from the hospital 2 days later. She sent one final message to her attorney weeks afterward, requesting standard visitation rights as a grandmother. Given the trustee's ruling and the account records now permanently attached to her name, that request was denied without much difficulty or debate. Sorenrevnge recovered fully within a month, her blood pressure stabilizing under careful monitoring right up until delivery. In the weeks leading up to her due date, we replaced the shattered wedding portrait with a new frame, a photo taken that same week in the hospital hallway. Tired and unglamorous, both of us laughing anyway. Sorenrevnge said she wanted the new picture to mean something truer than the old one ever had. Proof that we'd chosen to trust each other again after everything Rosalind had tried to break apart. Desley became something closer to family after that. Not just Sorenrevnge's oldest friend, but the person who had quietly refused to let a fabricated lie stand unchallenged. We asked her to be our daughter's godmother the week before the birth, and she cried harder accepting that than she had the entire week she'd spent tracing anonymous email accounts on our behalf. Our daughter arrived 3 weeks after that final conversation with Rosalind, healthy, loud, and utterly unaware of how close a stranger's quiet greed had come to reshaping her family before she'd ever taken her first breath in this world. I think about that doorway sometimes, usually late at night when the house is quiet and our daughter is finally asleep. The 60 seconds where I let a backward nightgown and a broken photograph turn me into someone who judged his own wife before he ever thought to simply ask her what happened. I got lucky that night, luckier than I deserved. Sorenrevnge's collapse interrupted my worst instincts before they ever became spoken words I could never take back again. Not everyone gets that kind of luck. Not everyone gets a second chance to choose differently before the damage becomes permanent. If you had walked into that room and seen exactly what I saw that night, the broken glass, the backward fabric, the dark stains spreading across white carpet, would you have trusted the woman you loved standing right in front of you, or would you have trusted the story your own fear was already writing for you in the dark?